Good morning and welcome to TVP World News. I'm your host, Diana Skaya. And we begin with breaking news coming out of Georgia. About 10 journalists from various editorial offices have been injured after police dispersed protests in front of the Georgian parliament. This is what News Georgia reports. Now, mass arrests are underway with some participants being injured. Now, protesters gathered in Georgian cities after the government decided to suspend EU accession talks until 2028. Now, this decision follows Brussels' resolution on Georgia's worsening democratic crisis and calls for new elections. On October 30, the European Commission announced that it had suspended the accession process with Georgia and said it would not recommend reinstating it unless the authorities in Tbilisi start complying with EU values, including clarifying irregularities during October's parliamentary elections. Now, the Georgian president, Salome Zurabishvili, also took part in the protests and asking the police whether they supported the Georgians or the Russians. Investigators looking into damage made 2 weeks ago to communications cables running under the Baltic Sea suspect that a Chinese ship deliberately cut it with its anchor. The Wall Street Journal reports this. Now, investigators are now working to determine whether Russia was behind the suspected sabotage. The severed cable has already been repaired. Now, according to the Wall Street Journal, a Chinese container ship carrying Russian fertilizers dropped its anchor near the first cut cable connecting Sweden and Lithuania and dragged it along the sea floor for more than 100 miles. As a result, it cut the second cable between Germany and Finland. Now, suspicious behavior such as speed reduction and turning off the transponder during the incident seems to rule out accidental causes of the event. The ship set off from the Russian port of Ust-Luga on the Gulf of Finland on November 15th. The incidents occurred on November 17th and 18th. Russian President Vladimir Putin has hailed Trump as a smart and experienced person and stressed that the incoming U.S. president will find a solution to the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Now, speaking at a press conference in Kazakhstan's Astana, the Russian head of state said Trump is not safe after he survived quote-unquote attempted murder, and more than once. Putin went on to praise the American president-elect as an intelligent person and expressed hope that Trump is cautious enough to understand the issue of his safety. Now, the Russian leader noted that during the presidential campaign, Trump was exposed to humiliating and unfounded legal charges, and he faced attacks on his family, which Putin described as something even bandits wouldn't do. Now, staying on Putin, in Kazakhstan's capital, Vladimir Putin praised the new Oreshnik missile recently used against Ukraine, claiming it turns everything to dust. However, analysts suggest that Putin's Central Asian allies, gathered under the CSTO framework, offer only limited support.
The strongmen of the Collective Security Treaty Organization, the post-Soviet equivalent of NATO, have touched down in Astana for a summit. Much to their surprise, they were greeted by a huge Ukrainian flag illuminated in the city center. The authorities of the Moscow-friendly nation are investigating whether this was a technical glitch or a hacker attack. But the flag heralded one of the main topics touched upon at the summit, the war in Ukraine.
The strikes on our part also took place in response to the ongoing strikes on Russian territory by American ATACMS missiles. As I have said many times, there will always be a response from our side.
Although CSTO members are obliged to support each other in an attack, experts say Russia cannot count on its allies' support when it comes to its war against Kyiv.
This is in the back of the mind of all the CSTO leaders is what exactly does Russia want them to expect that they might be able to do to help them out, given that if we're going to go by the letter of the charter, they are supposed to be there if Russia calls for their help. And of course, none of them want to do this.
The CSTO has shrunk in recent years. Armenia froze its participation in the alliance this year after Russia failed to protect Yerevan from an Azerbaijani campaign to take away the disputed Nagorno-Karabakh region. The operation led to the expulsion of more than 100,000 Armenians. But before the CSTO meeting started, Putin and Kazakh President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev spoke business. The two signed more than a dozen documents deepening political, economic, energy and transit cooperation.
We discussed the possibilities of creating new routes for pumping our products, both oil and gas, to third countries, primarily to the People's Republic of China, including through the territory of Kazakhstan.
Although Kazakhstan has been pledging to abide by Western sanctions placed on Russia, Astana remains a key intermediary facilitating sanctions evasion schemes.
Kazakhstan now is playing crucial role for the trade, like for parallel import with Russia, and also avoiding avoiding sanctions on military products that moved through Central Asia to Russia.
The economies of the two countries are closely linked. After a sharp weakening of the Russian ruble, Kazakhstan's currency fell to an all-time low this week against the US dollar.
Moving on now to Romania, where thousands of young people gathered in Bucharest for the fourth consecutive night to protest the Constitutional Court's decision to recount votes in recent presidential elections. Now, students kept chanting, "Don't take our freedom," saying they want change and not a recount. Now, people in the Romanian capital took to the streets again to demonstrate the court's order and the independent candidate, Călin Georgescu. They intend to protest each night and remind their parents and grandparents to go out and vote. Now, banners held by demonstrators read "No fascism, no war, no Georgescu in the second round," and "People tell you in chorus, do not vote for a dictator." Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, some 20 people stood in front of the National Theatre to support the anti-NATO and anti-EU candidates. As the incoming European Commission prepares to tackle major challenges, including the threat from Russia and a sluggish economy, a potential obstacle is already in sight. Now, the EU's diplomatic service is reportedly considering reducing its international presence. Our European Affairs correspondent Sasha Farbach reports from Strasbourg.
And the European plenary session has concluded many items on the agenda. The main takeaway here was on Wednesday, the new commission, all 27 have now been approved, and the final green light. But it was a narrow win for Ursula von der Leyen's new team. In fact, with just 370 votes, it's one of the narrowest ever in terms of any commission, even less than her last stint 5 years ago. But nevertheless, she managed, and now they will begin in earnest. That's on the 1st of December. Many things to tackle, looking at how to deal with transatlantic relations with the United States, looking at an aggressive Russia, and how to keep Europe competitive.
War, conflict, and human suffering continue unabated in our neighborhood, from Ukraine to the Middle East to parts of Africa. Europe must play a stronger role in all of these areas.
Now, the idea here is that we'll start in earnest tackling these main issues. There are key pillars as well that were addressed during Ursula von der Leyen's speech, including defense, which will be very much important as we face down a war in Ukraine and an aggressive Vladimir Putin. But other things also were discussed here, looking at finalizing the EU's next budget for 2025, looking at a full amount here of well over billions and billions, looking at 199 billion euros, focusing on different things like mobility, looking at health, more focus on that, looking at also border management, interestingly, and also other issues looking at research. And this has now gone forward. It's 10% bigger than the last budget. This is not the major MFF, the 7-year major budget for the European Union, but it's still key on many, many issues. Then also what was ended is a resolution on supporting Ukraine, and this parliament in particular has been very supportive of Kiev's efforts to continue that fight, to move forward into European Union membership, but also at the same time looking at a very interesting line in one of these resolutions where the EPP, so the centrist party here, criticized Olaf Scholz's recent phone call with Vladimir Putin. Now, the wording was a bit more subdued, but it has been here flagged as potentially a first step in German elections. The EPP very much criticizing Scholz, and that is surely going to make waves, not just here from Strasbourg, but into Berlin. And that was all from this plenary, and now all the MEPs will return to Brussels. Sasha Farbach for TVP World at the European Parliament in Strasbourg.
As Ukraine faces its most intense aerial attacks since the war began, the Wall Street Journal reports that the administration of U.S. President Joe Biden may be unable to deliver all pledged military aid before Donald Trump's inauguration. Now, while the president-elect's strategy for resolving the conflict remains unclear, he has appointed a special envoy to oversee peace efforts between Ukraine and Russia.
Such scenes are a daily bread for citizens across Ukraine, sheltering from incoming Russian attacks.
Our mornings begin with checking the phone to see if there is an air alert. I have to take the eldest daughter to school. We saw that there was an air alert and went to the metro. We are indeed fed up with all of it.
In the last weeks, Ukraine has been experiencing the biggest drone and missile attacks of the war aimed at its energy infrastructure.
Attacks on energy facilities are taking place all over Ukraine. The operator of the transmission system of NEC Ukrenergo urgently introduced an emergency power cut. As soon as the security situation allows, the consequences will be clarified.
Moscow says the attacks are a response to the usage of US-made weapons against targets in Russia and vows there will be more.
At present, the Ministry of Defense and the General Staff of the Russian Army are selecting targets to hit on Ukrainian territory. These could be military facilities, defense industry enterprises, or decision-making centers in Kiev.
The war so far has shown that Western aid is crucial in fending off Russian attacks. But with just months remaining in office, the Joe Biden administration is supposedly facing logistical challenges in providing Ukraine with all the military aid authorized by Congress before some of the authority in this regard will be transferred to Donald Trump's team. As of today, the Biden administration has still over $6.5 billion worth of equipment to be transferred to Ukraine.
And while the United States, followed by our allies, some allies, provide Ukraine with a permission to hit inside Russia, that is actually really not enough, because we also need to send more long-range missiles.
Trump, meanwhile, nominated Keith Kellogg, a retired lieutenant general and former national security advisor, as special envoy to Ukraine and Russia. Kellogg, who played a key role in Trump's first team, is expected to spearhead efforts to negotiate an end to the ongoing war in Ukraine.
General Keith Kellogg has been around for decades. He's retired three-star Army general. This is not a controversial nomination. In fact, this nomination, along with a few others in the national security space, gives me guarded optimism that the Trump team is going to thread the needle on a very complex set of foreign policy issues.
Trump, who pledged to end the war on the first day back in office, has not yet revealed the specifics of his strategy. While some fears are mounting, one thing is certain. In January, the world may expect some shift.
As Poland prepares to take over the presidency of the EU Council, it prioritizes enhanced cybersecurity across the bloc. Now, key initiatives include the creation of a European cybersecurity fund and a European cyber shield, aiming to foster closer cooperation among member states when tackling cyber attacks. Our reporter, Ovidiusz Niceja, attended Poland's Internet Governance Forum in Warsaw and has this latest report.
Poland says that Europe is at high risk of cyber attacks and hybrid attacks. And that's why Warsaw wants to allocate more money on defense. Not just on traditional defense like tanks and airplanes, but also on cyber security. It was announced here at the IGF, the Internet Governance Forum in Warsaw, by the Deputy Prime Minister of Poland and the Minister for Digital Affairs, Krzysztof Gawkowski, that during its upcoming presidency of the Council of the European Union, Poland will do everything to create a European cybersecurity fund and a European cyber shield. I asked the Prime Minister what exactly he means by these two terms, and here's his response.
Security in cyberspace should be the shared responsibility of all EU member states. During its upcoming presidency of the Council of the European Union, Poland will definitely propose establishing a joint EU fund that will, first and foremost, guarantee that we have the necessary means to spend. We're also aware that we need a common cyberspace shield that will help us protect the bloc from the rising number of attacks coming from Russia.
Among other declarations made here by the Polish Deputy Prime Minister is that Poland wants to be a leader in digitalization and that it will invest in breakthrough technologies such as artificial intelligence and quantum computers. I am at IGF Poland. This is a Polish edition of a UN initiative, the Internet Governance Forum, which is a platform for discussion. It brings together people from the private sector, public sector, also civil society and academia, experts in all things digital to discuss future legislation in order to make internet a more inclusive, a safer and better space for everyone.
And that's all for this edition of World News here on TVP World. I'm Diana Skye, but don't go away. Up next, an interview with our host, Jonas Shrevinski. Stay tuned.